The cub had no name that Mara could pronounce. It had fallen into the ravine 3 kilometers east of forward operating base Karanath, a young Vorkai, barely past its first seasonal molt, its silver-banded fur matted with blood from a deep gash along its left flank. Mara had found it while running the perimeter sweep alone, because Sergeant Drell had sprained his ankle on the ridge and someone had to finish the route. She almost walked past it. The Vorkai were not allies. They were not enemies either, technically. They occupied a complicated diplomatic middle space that the brass had summarized in a single briefing slide labeled "Avoid Unnecessary Interaction." They were apex predators, pack hunters, territorial beyond what most species considered rational. Their packs controlled the forested highlands north of the human settlement corridor, and the standing order was simple. Don't crowd them, don't feed them, don't make eye contact if you can help it. The cub was staring at her with eyes the color of amber set in smoke. It was not attacking. It was not even growling. It was breathing in shallow, wet pulls, and one of its rear legs was bent at an angle that made Mara's stomach turn. She knelt down anyway. "Okay," she said, mostly to herself. "Okay." She'd trained as a combat medic before her reassignment to the Colonial Liaison Post. She still carried the full kit, old habit, one that Sergeant Drell teased her about constantly. She unzipped it now, pulling out the broad-spectrum wound sealant and the portable scanner. The scanner wasn't calibrated for Vorkai biology. She knew that. She used it anyway, looking for heat signatures, for the kind of internal bleeding that would make intervention pointless. The cub watched her hands. It didn't flinch when she applied the sealant, even though the compound burned on contact. She'd used it on herself twice and knew the sensation. It only made a sound once, a low, resonant vibration deep in its chest, when she carefully straightened the rear leg and bound it with the emergency splint. Not a cry of pain, something more like a question. "I know," she said. "I know it hurts. I'm sorry." She sat with it for 2 hours. She didn't have food it could eat, but she had water, and she fashioned a crude shade shelter from her emergency tarp because the afternoon sun on Karanath's highlands was brutal and the cub's breathing was already labored. She radioed in her position, told Drell she'd found something that needed time, gave no further details because she didn't know how to explain it in terms the standing orders permitted. When the cub's breathing steadied, she stood to leave. The amber eyes followed her. "Stay," she told it, which was absurd, because she had no idea if it understood tone or intent or anything she was doing. "Stay until the pack finds you." She walked back to base and wrote nothing in the official log. 17 days passed. Mara ran the perimeter. She filed reports. She attended the weekly liaison briefing where Administrator Hessler complained that the Vorkai had been encroaching on the northern sensor grid again, which wasn't new. They'd been doing it for months, and nobody had figured out why. She drank bad coffee and watched the Highland tree lean and tried not to think about whether the cub had survived. On the 18th morning, she stepped outside at first light and found 3 of them waiting. Adult Vorkai were large. She knew this from the briefing files. The files had included photographs, measurements, threat assessments. None of it had fully conveyed what it meant to stand 4 meters from 1, from 3. In the gray pre-dawn quiet, the mist still pooling at the tree roots, the air smelling of pine resin and something darker, muskier, animal. They were enormous. Their shoulder height matched hers. Their forelimbs carried retractable claws that the threat assessment had described as capable of stripping light armor plating. 2 of them had the deep-banded silver markings of mature pack hunters. The third, slightly smaller, moved with a faint hitch in its rear gait. Mara stood very still. The pack leader, she assumed, stepped forward. It carried something in its jaws, held with a precision that seemed almost deliberate, almost careful. It set the object down on the ground between them and stepped back. She looked at it. It was a banner. Torn, stained, but recognizable. The geometric insignia of the Harath Compact Raider clan that had been hitting the eastern settlements for the past 2 months. Everyone at the base knew that mark. It had appeared on burned supply caches, on the sides of ambushed transports, on a wall in Settlement 7 that nobody had repainted yet because nobody had the heart to. The banner had clearly been taken by force. Recently, the edges weren't weathered. Mara crouched down slowly, her eyes moving between the pack leader's face and the object on the ground. The Vorkai didn't retreat. The pack leader held her gaze with the still, unreadable intensity of a creature that had never needed to perform dominance because it had never been questioned. She picked up the banner. The smaller one, the cub, she was almost certain, made that sound again. The deep chest vibration. The question that wasn't a question. Mara pressed her closed fist against her sternum, once, slowly. She didn't know if it meant anything to them. It was the only gesture she had. The pack leader watched this. Then it turned, and the others followed, and within 30 seconds the Treeline had swallowed all three of them without a sound. She brought the banner to Administrator Hessler. She didn't explain how she'd gotten it. She said she'd found it on the perimeter, which was true enough. Hessler took it with wide eyes and passed it immediately to Intelligence, who confirmed within the hour that the Harath Raider cell that had been operating from the Highland Ridge had been, their word, neutralized. Completely. Efficiently. With a speed and totality that the analyst described as consistent with a coordinated predator strike rather than any known compact military operation. The eastern attacks stopped. They stayed stopped. 3 weeks after that, the Vorkai began appearing on the northern sensor grid at regular intervals. Not encroaching, monitoring. Running parallel to the human settlement perimeter in loose, overlapping patrol patterns that the analysts initially flagged as territorial behavior before someone noticed the patterns were oriented outward, away from the settlements, scanning the approaches from the east and the high passes. Administrator Hessler called an emergency liaison meeting to determine the cause. Mara attended. She said nothing. She understood something that the briefing files and the threat assessments and the diplomatic middle space summaries had not captured because it couldn't be captured in data points or slide decks. It lived in the specific quality of a cub's amber gaze, steady and present even through pain. In the weight of a torn banner placed with deliberate precision on cold ground. In a chest vibration that sounded like a question but functioned, she had come to believe, as something closer to recognition. The Vorkai were not complicated. The diplomatic files had made them complicated by trying to categorize them within frameworks they didn't fit. Stripped of the frameworks, they were extraordinarily simple, a species that remembered, with absolute fidelity, what had been done to those it claimed. Mara had tended one of their cubs. She had sat in the heat and fashioned shade and straightened a broken leg and said, "I know it hurts. I'm sorry." And she had walked away without asking for anything. They had not forgotten. They would not forget. 6 months later, when the Harath Compact launched a coordinated assault on 3 settlement points simultaneously, a last, desperate offensive that the intelligence teams had failed to predict, the response came from 2 directions at once. Human defenders held the settlement gates. Something else moved through the highlands in the dark, fast and silent and total, striking the Compact's rear positions before the assault had fully developed, collapsing their coordination, driving their forward elements back into a crossfire they hadn't expected from terrain they believed was empty. The battle lasted 4 hours. The Compact withdrew. They did not return. In the after-action report, the anomalous Highland contact was logged as unknown Allied force, nature unconfirmed, because the analysts couldn't verify identity and the official Vorkai diplomatic status remained technically avoid unnecessary interaction. Mara read the report in the base canteen, drinking bad coffee. Sergeant Drell sat down across from her and slid a printed copy of the Highland contact section across the table. "Any idea what that was?" he asked. She looked at the words unknown Allied force for a moment. "No idea," she said. Outside, the Highland Treeline stood dark and still against the morning sky, and somewhere in the deep silver-banded forest, a pack ran its patrol and remembered and kept watch.